Hey guys, welcome to my channel. I hope you're all doing very well. So I just watched Soul on Disney Plus. Let's talk about it. So Soul is the latest film by Pixar and is directed by Peter Docter, who also brought us Monsters Inc. and Inside Out. Now this was a film that was very much anticipated in Disney's roster, even though these days it seems like the Marvels and the Star Warses of Disney's roster get more attention, but Pixar is definitely a force when it comes to animation, and it definitely gets the attention that it deserves still from the film industry. But unfortunately, because of the pandemic, this film did not land in theaters as was intended, but rather straight to Disney Plus on Christmas Day. So it was a nice little Christmas treat for a lot of viewers worldwide. Worldwide, unlike a certain other franchise that wasn't able to do the same, but we're not talking about that today. Many of us decided to enjoy Soul on Christmas Day as it landed on Disney Plus. I'm here to share with you guys my thoughts on this film and whether I think it would have been cinema quality anyways. So before we dive into my thoughts on that, please be sure to subscribe to my channel and make sure you turn on your notifications so that you can be told when I upload next. Without further ado, let's get into this. First off, let's just get the elephant in the room out of the way. I wanted to dive into the fact that this is, of course, the first ever Pixar film to have a black character as its lead. This is a huge deal for Pixar and for animation, as it is seldom seen. Now, on that front as well, we have to address the fact that unfortunately this film seems to commit a cardinal sin, as it were, when it comes to black representation in animation, in that it quickly turns its black character into something else. Like, the black character gets very little screen time. This is a theme that we've seen several times over, even by Disney itself with Princess and the Frog. Now, I love the Princess and the Frog, but I recently rewatched it, and I have to say, with this theme in mind, it did kind of tarnish my enjoyment of the film, and I was very much looking with an eagle eye to make sure that the same couldn't be said for Soul, because it is an unfortunate trend that we have seen where these black characters aren't allowed to exist as black characters on screen for very long until their physical forms are tampered with. But in this case, I have to say, with Soul, the character of Joe actually ends up with quite a bit of screen time throughout the film, even though at the beginning I was a little bit worried because we got 5 minutes with him and then he turned into a soul. Okay, he turned into an incorporeal being, so I was worried at the beginning there, but we did go back to the earth world, to our plane of existence, and we did see the character in his true physical form as a black male, and that is something that is very much, important in terms of tackling this theme, tackling this trend that we have seen in animation several times over. However, if I was going to be nitpicky, which I am, okay, I would say that even though he had his physical form as a black man for most of the film, he didn't have his voice. There is this little plot twist in the middle of the film where his voice, and indeed his soul, ends up in the body of a cat. And so for a lot of the film, even though we see the physical presence of Joe, we hear the voice of Tina Fey, who portrays the character of 22, who is this unborn soul who's yet to have entered the world. But still, we do see the physical presence of Joe as a black male character in a Pixar film. So we're making progress here, just baby steps, okay? But I don't want to be seeing this again. Like, I want this to be the last time where this sort of thing happens, because we need to move on. We need to move on from this trope. I hope this is indeed the last occasion where we see something like this, where a character of color is no longer allowed to exist in their own body and they're turned into some, wacky character, wacky entity as chaos ensues. But in terms of the story itself, I think the story of Soul is very strong. As most Pixar films tend to get it right when it comes to the story. I mean, these films aren't just pumped out and rushed out. Like, they are very carefully thought through. And this story in particular reminded me of a sort of hybrid between Coco and Inside Out. And I think that was a very interesting combination there, where we have this insight into death, life beyond death, as we did in Coco. That was expertly explored, beautifully explored in Coco. But then we also have this kind of inside out element where we're looking within ourselves once again, except this time, instead of looking within our minds, we are focused on our hearts or our souls, or the things, the intangible things that make us who we uniquely are. So I think that's such a fascinating insight that Pixar is trying to offer us here. It's just a continuation on Pixar's long, arduous journey to try and get children to understand these incredibly complex and adult concepts at a very young age in a way that is very relatable to them, in a way that they can kind of soak up and absorb that information and let it develop as they grow. And I've always appreciated that aspect about Pixar, the fact that they're not afraid to tackle these very complex matters, these questions about life and your soul and your purpose in life. Like, these are huge questions that even adults don't have answers to. But the fact that they're trying to introduce these issues, to introduce these concepts to children in a way that is kind of packaged in this beautiful and incredibly fun and interesting family film is really admirable. I think that's something that I always enjoy about Pixar, even though sometimes it is accompanied by quite a bit of emotional manipulation and also you have a little bit of repetition, you know, a little bit of revisiting some of their old concepts. And perhaps in this case, in the case of Soul, I would say that whilst it is interesting to see this hybrid between Coco and Inside Out kind of materialize in this film, I still prefer the film Coco and indeed Inside Out overall. I think those two films are superior to this one particularly. I would say the main reason for that is because the characters here don't really shine as much as I wanted them to. I feel like there are certain characters in Pixar's catalogue that just shine brighter than the others. I mean, we all know Buzz, Woody, Nemo, you know, certain characters that just really shine. They jump off of the pages of Pixar's massive tome. But here we don't really have many characters that kind of come close. Like, I was thinking of a character like Miguel, who goes through a very similar journey. It's a completely different backstory and a completely different context, but here he goes through a similar journey in terms of going to the land of the dead, visiting his ancestors. That story that is driven by this incredibly likable, lovable character, it just feels so much stronger to me than the character of Joe. I think the main reason why I found it difficult to connect with him as much is because in every corner that you turn there's someone pointing out his flaws. Like, there's someone highlighting, you know, an issue that he has or how far he's fallen short in his life's goals. And instead of it seeming as though, you know, everyone's kind of kicking him when he's already down, it seems like you also see evidence of his dissatisfaction on screen. Like at the beginning, where you open up with him being a teacher and listening to the horrible cacophony that is the school kids playing in their jazz band, you just see how fed up he is already. And to me, it's kind of tough to side with him on that front when the kids are like, they're trying their best. Like, they need someone to kind of hype them up. They need someone to energize them, just like that an individual child who has an actual passion for playing the trumpet or whatever instrument that was. But I just wanted to see him be the one to connect with her and show her what it means to, you know, fall in love with music the way that he has, or at least the way that he thinks he has. But instead, that scene with the girl takes place with 22 being inside of Joe's body. So we never actually get to see him have that great teacher moment where he discovers his love of imparting passion and inspiration onto others. And in a similar vein to where it was difficult for me to connect to the character of Joe, at least especially in the first half of the film, I very much found it difficult to connect to the character of 22 because they came across as a very annoying brat. Like, I have to say, I think it was a nice twist having this character be thousands upon thousands of years old and having all of these historical figures trying to impart some knowledge, some wisdom into them. But the character was just so grating for the majority of the film until they kind of learned their big lesson where they did deserve a place on Earth. They did have something unique and special to impart into, you know, human existence. And they did have a spark within them that made them special and gave them a sense of a purpose and a sense of being, and that was worthy of them being on Earth. That moment when the character learned that, it was a very touching moment, especially when you see the character go through the lowest of the low and become a lost soul. It was very heartbreaking. That's when my opinion of the character completely shifted. But until that point, they kind of became a little bit grating. I also completely saw it coming that the character would want to stay in Joe's body. Like, I called it the second that the character went into Joe's body. I was like, oh, I know exactly where this is going to go. Now, Pixar isn't only known for its deep storytelling, it's also known for for its incredible animation. The style of animation that's adopted here is very interesting, especially for the characters of, you know, Terry and the Jerrys, these kind of incorporeal beings that exist in the plane between Earth and the great beyond. They are fascinatingly animated. I loved it. It was like a kind of Picasso style. I found it fascinating, especially when the character of Terry, who's kind of the accountant of the great beyond, was entering Earth to find Joe, and he was kind of hiding himself in these, you know, cracks and crevices and these very clean lines that were the cool, crisp, clean lines were such a great juxtaposition to, you know, the warmth, the dirtiness, the imperfections of New York City. I found it to be an excellent animation choice. I'm still not the biggest fan of the way that they animated the character of Joe, though, I have to say. Like, it's not my favorite human characterizations in this film, but still, I think the way that they portrayed the great beyond and the Jerrys and Terrys was absolutely fascinating. And also the voice cast for the Terrys and Jerrys were perfect, especially for Terry. I found Terry to be an excellent voice. It's the woman who's from New Zealand, I believe, who's also in Thor Ragnarok. I'll put her name over here, but she was phenomenal. She was absolutely phenomenal as that character. And since we're on the voice cast itself, I was kind of talking about animation, but we'll take a pause to the voice cast and say Jamie Foxx and Tina Fey are great here. I'm less certain about whether Tina Fey was the perfect choice to portray this 22 character, who could have honestly been portrayed by a kid. I do think that Jamie Foxx was perfect as this character. I think he brought a lot of warmth and personality to this character. But anyways, back to the animation. Like I said, I was a huge fan of the way that they portrayed the great beyond and the characters who live in this ethereal plane of existence. But also, as we've been seeing often from Pixar, the portrayal of the real world outside of the humans and the animals that exist in it is absolutely superb. And I think that's what animation is all about these days. It's about creating these kind of weird, bizarre looking real life living characters. Like the humans, the animals, they look crazy, but the animation of their surroundings, the environment, like they come to life. The attention to detail is insane. When you're inside that jazz bar, you're telling me that doesn't look like a photo of a jazz bar with just animated characters inside of it? The fact that every single pixel on that screen is animated is crazy. You can feel the dustiness, you can feel the crampiness of that bar, you can almost feel the keys that he's playing as he enjoys that music, as he gets lost in that music. Wow, absolutely beautifully imagined. And of course, another huge feature when it comes to Pixar films is the music. The music can be so iconic in some of these Pixar films. I mean, if you're talking about You've Got a Friend in Me from the Toy Story franchise, or Remember Me from Coco, can you tell that I'm a fan of Coco? And in fact, I do have a ranking video for Pixar films on my channel, so you can check that out if you want to find out more about my thoughts on some of these amazing films. But the music can play a huge role for me in terms of elevating a Pixar film, and indeed any film. And I have to say that the music here was kind of okay. Like, it was kind of mid-tier Pixar for me. I wasn't really getting any memorable songs that I would hum to myself after watching this film. I'm not the biggest fan of jazz though, so keep that in mind. I liked the jazz elements being incorporated in the film to kind of make it distinct, especially in contrast again to the kind of ethereal world that existed beyond the planes of human existence. Like, that music felt very, I don't know, it felt very stagnant. Like, the beats were very stagnant in a way that the jazz, the long notes of jazz, very much contrasted against that. So the music was very intentional here. Like, I heard it, I was paying attention, but I wasn't humming it after I watched the film. But still, to the credit of the music of this film, it very much tapped into the African American jazz culture, and I very much liked that fact. The fact that it didn't shy away from the fact that it has this black character in the lead role, and so it made jazz a huge component in that, which was great because that's a really important aspect to African American culture that they highlighted here. Another incredibly important aspect to black culture that was highlighted in this film was the barber scene. The barber scene was mwah. truly elevated it beyond. This was my favorite scene in the whole film. The fact that they thought, and I know that this was something that they kind of added on, like when they were talking to black creators, I saw a whole feature on it. The fact that they thought to have a barber sequence when he's about to have this huge audition to play with this huge, I think her name is Dorothy, to play with this huge jazz player. And so he gets ready, he's putting on this new suit, he's excited to go. And then of course, because he's a black male, he goes to the barbers. He goes to the barbers to get a trim, and it's just beautiful. It's absolutely beautiful. I love the barber. He looked like he was doing a great job. I also love the vibe of the barbers itself, the fact that people were just kind of lovingly mocking each other, and it seemed very easy but at the same time very therapeutic. As soon as you sit on that chair, like, oh, they got it right, they got it absolutely right. I was so proud. I was so proud of them for that moment. I think even though the rest of the film to me never quite lived up to the amazingness of that scene, I still think that overall it was all the better for it. So overall, I very much enjoyed Soul, as I'm very happy to say. I'm happy to see that we're getting more diversity in the leading characters of these Pixar films. I'm just so glad to see more representation in these animated films, especially by these huge animation studios. But having said that, I will say that overall, even though this film explores some really incredibly deep concepts, I have to say that when looking at the entirety of their roster, I wouldn't say that Soul stands out to me as an instant classic. Just after my initial watch of the film, I would say that the characters don't really stand out to me. The music doesn't really stand out to me as instantly memorable, and also the themes that are explored are so similar to Coco and to Inside Out and even to Up and many other Pixar films that we've seen before, that they really needed to do something extra in order to make this stand out from the already pretty admirable crowd. So with that being said, I'm going to be giving Soul a 7.5 out of 10. So that's it from me. Now that I told you guys my thoughts on Soul, it's time for you guys to let me know what you thought of this film down in the comments below. Please be sure to subscribe to catch new videos coming up. Thank you guys so much for watching. I really appreciate it, and I will see you in the next one. Bye!